I was just minding my own damn business today at the dollar store, stoned off my ass looking for some candy. I tend to look down when I'm in public places like stores. Social anxiety. So I didn't really notice the guy at first. But then it was hard not to because he kept pacing up and down the aisles, grabbing packages of cookies and putting them back, acting real shifty and weird. I walked by him and he mumbled something to me about being hungry. I looked up at him and he gave a fake laugh to be polite. He was white and bald with a tattoo on the back of his head. As I walked past him, he said, "Damn girl," and he looked me up and down and smiled. I ignored him and kept looking for the candy I wanted. He tries to strike up a conversation with me by saying, "Yeah, I just got out 3 days ago. I did 25 years. I said, "Oh wow, for what?" He said, matter-of-factly, "Murder," and looked right at me and smiled. I started to panic, a bit internally, but played it off cool. He asked me where I was from and what I was doing there. I told him I'm from Texas and I was visiting my boyfriend. My boyfriend lives in a small town about an hour outside of the big city I live in, so I kept in mind this is a small town, Texas. He says, "Oh, I'm from California. I just got here," and winked at me. I said, "Oh, that's cool," and walked to the register. He didn't even give me 6 feet. He stood so close to me in line I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I said, "Dude, give me 6 feet. I don't know what diseases you're carrying from the pen." And he's like, "What? The coronavirus shit? You really think that's serious?" And I said absolutely and walked out of the store. Luckily, there were 2 employees sitting up front, who I told what was going on. One of them walked me to my car as a cop was passing by. I have never been so relieved to see a cop in my life. And he walked up to us as I was getting in my car and telling her goodbye and bumped a cigarette off of her. I got in my car so quick and locked the doors immediately. He seemed like he was going to try to get in the passenger side. When I locked the doors, he just walked off and started looking around the parking lot. I burned off so quickly. "Mr. Murderer, don't you know that it creeps girls out when you tell them you just did 25 years for killing someone? Let's not meet." So, I work in a liquor store in the sticks, as most people would call it. When I first started working there almost 3 years ago, I kind of figured you'd run into some weird people. Also, I grew up in the city, so I've seen my fair share of creeps, and I feel like it's very easy for me to brush them off. So this guy, Billy, would come in and get a nip of Sambuca and mango zigzag. I pegged him more as a weed smoker than a drinker. He would say things like, "You gotta come smoke with me sometime. I have something at my house I want to show you." Side note, I have worked in customer service for many years, and I'm very friendly in general. I would always respond with, "No thanks, I just want to go home after work," or something along those lines. Never once implied I would ever go to his house, ever. It started getting to the point where he would come in every time he saw the truck I was driving at the time. One time he straight up walked into the back room at work and I told him, "You cannot be back here, this is for employees only." There were a couple of times he would come in and my coworker would have to lie and say, "Hey, insert boss's name here, is on the phone and needs to talk to you." Only one of my coworkers has ever seen how creepy he was being, so we both decided to tell our assistant manager what was happening, because she was a lot easier to talk to than my actual boss. When we told her, she was like, "Oh, Billy? He's harmless." She apparently had known him for many years, so I thought I was maybe overthinking it and brushed it off. Months had gone by and I just started working morning shifts with my boss. My boss is over 6 feet tall, ex-military, undercover badass as I like to put it. My boss out of nowhere one morning said, "Let me ask you a question." Here I thought I was in trouble for something and continues with, "How often does Billy come in and bother you?" I told him at least once or twice a week, which leads me to the next story. So my boss prior to this had invited me to go to a wine tasting We agreed to meet at the store and leave the truck there, so if I had to drink too much, I wouldn't be driving. It was my first tasting, and I got drunk. Anyways, while we were at the wine tasting, Billy had seen my truck and came into the store looking for me. My coworkers told him that I was not there and went with my boss to a tasting. He leaves, comes back 2 more times after that, circling the store looking for me. It was all on camera too. He went up to my coworker the 3rd time and he said, "I know you're lying to me. Where is she?" I'm very glad that I was too intoxicated to drive, and my boss dropped me off at my house, because I don't know how I would have reacted to Billy waiting around the store for me. After hearing all this information, I was extremely uncomfortable with all of this. I told my boss everything, and he told me Billy is temporarily banned from the store, till he talks to him face to face. 2 weeks later, Billy comes in to talk to my boss, and he pretty much says to Billy that if he continues to creep on me, trying to get me to come to his house or even so much as make eye contact with me, that he will permanently ban him from the store. After that, he stopped creeping on me. If he came into the store, he wouldn't even make eye contact. So time went by, no creepy Billy. Also, I worked days at this point, and Billy would come in after I was long gone. One day at work, I was in my own world working, and I hear someone run up behind me. I turn around and see it was Billy. He's like, "What's wrong?" I said, "Hi." "You didn't say anything. Are you mad at me?" I didn't even see him or hear him say hi. So I just said, "I'm busy in my own world over here." I can't remember what he said, but it was nothing creepy. So he walked away and I continued to work. Last thing that happened to me, I was leaving work after my morning shift. I needed gas, so I drove to the gas station after work. On my way there, a truck is in front of me. The truck pulls over and lets me pass while waving, so I'm thinking, who the fuck is this waving? Sure enough, it was Billy. His truck up behind my car and my heart started pounding. I reached for my pepper spray. He pulls into the fucking gas station as well. Oh great, I thought. I held the pepper spray the whole time as I was getting gas. I see Billy get out of his truck and go into the store. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm overthinking this, considering he didn't walk up to me. Oh wait, here comes Billy, walking out of the store and up to me as I'm pumping gas. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were a friend of mine." "Oh, but I know you." Then he had a stupid grin on his face. I kept my sentence short. "Yep, just getting gas." And then he asked me a fucking again. "Wanna come smoke with me?" I definitely had a bitch tone when I said, "No, I don't want to smoke with you. I'm going home." So he finally leaves. I told my boyfriend, who insists I get a restraining order, but I told him if there is one more situation, I will consider it. I told my assistant manager, just be on the safe side. Only reason I didn't tell my boss because, like I said to the AM, I don't want the guy banned, just to stop being a creep towards me. Currently nothing else has happened, and these stories are all over the course of almost 3 years. Maybe he's just a lonely guy and wants someone to smoke weed with. Or maybe he really is a creep. I'll update if anything else happens, but Billy, I don't want to smoke weed with you. Let's stop meeting. Just some background. I grew up, well, not a big city compared to many others, the biggest city in my state. It has a rather well-earned reputation for violence and crime. I happen to just live on the border of one of the toughest areas in the city. I lived in a trailer park, in the trailer closest to the bar that was right next door. This bar had a bad reputation and was repeatedly shut down after noise and violence disruptions, and always allowed to reopen, as long as they changed the venue's name. Still very unclear on the logic of that rule. So, I was no stranger to run-ins, and due to unsavory types appearing seemingly out of nowhere, and many neighbors I'd been warned to avoid. It was just the way it was, and from a young age I just assumed that's how life worked. People are dangerous, stay away. However, the position of our trailer had a fence on one side that separated us and the bar. and therefore was always held in suspicion due to many other stories, and one other trailer which for a long time was owned by people who were never home. Abandoned, or for a brief time a single mom and her 2 daughters, who were both younger than me. During those years, it felt like a cushion against anything threatening. After the single mom and her kids were evicted, though, that's when creepy neighbor dude moved in, and life changed. It was my freshman year of high school, so I was around 13 or 14 years old. My home life was not exactly leave it to beaver material, to say the least. But due to a mix of never knowing anything different and good old-fashioned naive on my part, I was only just beginning to realize it wasn't the norm for other people. I was sad to lose the girls as neighbors because even though they were younger, they were my only friends in the park after some probably highly illegal evictions my crazy old landlady had done a few years previous. Then this man moves in. He was the only one who technically lived there, but was often in a group of men in his yard for the first year or so. They were old enough for my adolescent brain to deem old, but younger than my parents, so probably a mix of late 20s to mid 30s, and their drunken revelry was almost comparable to the bar patrons on the other side, at times. Things were awkward from the day he moved in. Unfortunately, the first awkwardness was due to my stepfather being a terrible human being. He was racist, and proud and amused by his racist views. Our new neighbor was black, so within 2 weeks, a 6-foot fence was built between the length of our trailers, because he didn't want the new neighbor on the 1-foot wide strip of our property. That had never mattered before. And, of course, he took great joy in saying insulting, horrible things as he and I, you don't argue with my stepdad, built it. However, our new neighbor made no complaint about his words or the absurd fence. He was polite and waved whenever any of us would get home. This made me feel incredibly guilty, embarrassed, and indebted to the stranger for not only responding to my stepfather's hate in kind of relaying us with kindness. Unfortunately, that reaction helped set up a dangerous situation. One thing that started even before the fence was finished was that he and his group of friends would always move closer to the front of his trailer if they saw me leave to check the mail alone. Our mailbox was a community box in the middle of the park, and checking it was one of my chores. I would leave to the mailbox and they'd either be inside on the porch or in the yard. Inevitably, I'd come back to them congregating in the front/driveway area. He would say hello and his friends would just stare and laugh. I've always been afraid of strangers and, well, just people in general. It was a long-running joke in my family how frightened and uncomfortable I would get. They all knew I would grow out of it and think it was too funny. I haven't and I don't, and my gut has saved me and protected me more times than I can count, so I'm no longer ashamed of my wariness. I would mumble, hello, try to smile, and wave, but I'm sure I looked spooked because that was my natural state. I was sure they were laughing because I looked scared, but as time passed I felt more comfortable saying hello and waving. They'd all still laugh, which made me uncomfortable all over again. Were they laughing at me, my voice, my smile, my wave? Did I walk funny? More than anything, I just wished they'd ignore me. Then one day as I walked to the mailbox, he ran up and walked with me, and that became the daily norm. He'd come join me and ask normal questions about my day, school, etc. As we walked, I didn't like it. It was more like my normal anxiety. I just heard alarms going off every time he was near. But I didn't trust myself back then and had been told so many times how stupid I was for being afraid, that I kept berating myself for being paranoid about this nice man who'd never done anything wrong. Also, of note, only because it was the only weird thing I could put into words at the time, he never once checked his mail during these trips. If he had, it would have given me a fraction of comfort. If he had just needed to check his mail too, then it wasn't weird that he came to the mailbox with me. One particular afternoon, the dialogue started to change on these trips. We were at the mailbox and he said, "Hey, don't tell your dad. I said this, but you've got great legs, while looking me up and down. I didn't understand why at the time, but I wanted to cry and I wanted to shower. I just knew he shouldn't have said that. I stopped checking the mail for 3 weeks after that. It took that long for my parents to notice that I probably wasn't being truthful when I said there wasn't anything in our mailbox. My mom was yelling at me for being too damn lazy to walk to the mailbox, and finally told her that I wasn't lazy. I was scared of the neighbor. I explained that he'd been going to the mailbox with me and what he had said. She thought it was absolutely hilarious. Stupid, shy me was being scared over nothing again. She brought it up at dinner and insisted I tell my stepfather. I halfway thought maybe that he'd get it. After all, the neighbors said not to tell him, so he must know why it wasn't okay. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, you do have nice legs, so what?" So I was ashamed because obviously it was nothing, and I needed to get a grip. I started checking the mail again, and the neighbor didn't join me anymore, which made me feel guilty because I was afraid I'd hurt his feelings. But he also no longer was hanging out with a group of friends all the time. For a while, he was rarely home, but when he was home, he was always alone. Fast forward a few months or so, and I started seeing him randomly whenever I was home alone or checking the mail. He'd always wave and smile, enforcing that feeling of shame or overreacting. But then one evening while showering, my mother banged on the door yelling I was steaming up the bathroom, and it was going to make the carpet mold. So, as I'd done many times before, I turned the crack open in the little window in the shower to let the steam out. The window was pretty much exactly forehead level at the top, but only 4 to 5 inches tall, and ran the length of the shower wall. I'd been opening it for a while, showering almost every day since I was 5 or 6. You couldn't see the person in the shower except for their head, and even though you'd have to be looking to even notice, I cracked it open. But I heard a sound, so I looked out. I immediately made eye contact with creepy neighbor dude. I instantly looked away because I felt like I was being rude by looking out of the window. I kind of crouched to hide my head and tried to continue with my shower, but I felt exposed and uncomfortable. So, a couple of minutes later, peeked out the window again and reassured myself that it was just an uncomfortable coincidence. He was still there, leaning on his porch railing, and smiled slowly when we made eye contact again. I closed the window and quickly finished. I lectured myself endlessly that it was all just coincidence, and that I was just being stupid again. But after it happened 3 different times, I just started taking fast and cold showers so I didn't have to open the window. Shortly after the unpleasant shower event started, he started waiting outside for me when I get home from school. I would walk home from the bus stop and he just happened to be in front of the trailer. At first it was just every now and then, but then became daily. He would walk out into my path and block me from my front gate. He'd make small talk, as he'd done countless times during the walks to the mailbox. I'd answer as politely as I could, while also insisting that I needed to get inside to take care of my dogs since they'd been inside all day while my parents were at work, and I was at school. Around that time, a girl about a year younger than me moved into the park at the far end. She was nice, and we had class together, but we didn't really talk. That is, until one day when we got off the bus and she told me to hold on. She asked if I wanted her to walk with me. I was surprised and confused by the offer, but excited that maybe he'd leave me alone if I wasn't alone. I accepted her offer and she asked me if I knew that creepy guy that lived next door to me. I was so relieved that someone else thought he was creepy. I wanted to cry and smile at the same time. She said that the week before she had stopped at the landlord's trailer to ask a question, and when she left she saw me walking to my door and him just standing there watching. Then when he saw her, he started walking with her and trying to talk with her, and told her that she had beautiful hair. She told him to fuck off and ran the rest of the way home. She and I developed a system where she would walk with me to my driveway. Then I'd stand on my porch and watch her walk until she turned the corner, where I, and therefore he, could no longer see her. He stopped waiting for us after school. A few weeks went by with nothing weird, It was fall, and when I left the bus stop in the mornings, it was dark now, and my new friend only rode the bus in the afternoon. One morning he saw me leave for the bus stop and called after me to have a good day. From that point on, he'd always been there and when I would leave the house. Both my parents worked early shifts, so I was alone from around 5:30 a.m. It was obvious because their vehicles were gone. At first, he'd pretend to happen to have something to do outside at that exact time and act surprised to see me. Then he started just sitting on the front of his house waiting. Halloween came and I wore a costume to school. I was 15, and like most costumes you can buy at Party City or Walmart in a bag, it was admittedly a bit revealing. Nothing crazy. I was like Midnight Spider Witch, or some other such nonsense long-sleeve dress that went down to my ankles, but was much more form-fitting than anything I'd ever worn normally. A little low-cut, and had a slit up the slide that went higher than one might want. I waited and watched that one tiny shower window, and didn't leave at normal time. I saw him go inside his house and made a break for it. He caught up before I was even completely past his driveway. He was grinning and leering and made some comments about how I was sure growing up nice and warned me to be careful about boys. I ran for the bus, calling over my shoulder that I needed to hurry or I'd miss the bus. After that, he'd start waiting for me in my driveway and my gate in the mornings. I would get completely ready for school, then peek out of my window to see if he was there. And he almost always was. He'd pace back and forth, whistling poorly. To this day, I absolutely hate when people cannot whistle a tune whistle. And even if they can whistle a tune, it drives me crazy. Some mornings I went out and faced him, but he started touching my shoulder or putting his hand on the small of my back. So soon, I just started ditching school to avoid him. I'd call my mom at work and say I missed the bus or the bus came early. One of my friends was learning how to drive, and every once in a while he would pick me up to make sure I went to school. My neighbor would retreat to his own driveway and glare at us while I got in the car and we drove away. One day after I had almost missed a week of school, he was in the driveway with about 3 other guys waiting for me when I came back from checking the mail. He called my name, and as I went to walk past him, and I waved but kept walking, he intercepted me and said, "Wait, I have a gift for you since you've been home sick. I made it for you." He proceeded to hand me a door hanger thing. Best I figure it was meant to be a hanger on the doorknob. Anyway, it was made of beads and had my name, and the colors were the exact color scheme of my bedroom. I was beyond freaked out. First of all, until this day he never once said my name, and I had felt oddly comfortable in believing that he didn't know it. Second of all, he had never been inside my home, not even for a second that I was aware of, and I knew my racist stepfather wouldn't have allowed him in, and my mother was too afraid of my stepfather to allow him in. My bedroom was at the front of the trailer, and had 2 big windows, but my scaredy cat self was too cautious of who or what may peek inside to ever open my blinds or curtains, even for a few minutes. My room was mauve, mint green, and ivory for goodness sakes. Not exactly an easy guess combination. Also, don't judge me, I definitely didn't choose the decor. I said something that resembled thank you and made my way inside, while he and his friends watched me go and laughed. I took it with me to school the next day and broke down crying to my friends. They all thought it was weird, of course, but since he had never hurt me, some thought I was being too paranoid, and he was just a nice but strange guy. Some of them agreed that it all felt wrong, and like it was building to something bad. My friend who would sometimes give me rides was really worried, because how angry the neighbor always acted when I got the rides. In fact, that friend picked me up and brought me home for the rest of the school year. I did my best just to never go outside my home alone from that point on. A few months later, I got a job and dropped out and got my GED, and started just not being home period as much as possible. Had a few uncomfortable run-ins where he'd say weird things like, "You've got a good figure. Just what men want. Be careful not to lose that figure." But once I had help from friends, it was easy to avoid him. Plot twist. About 3 years after the gift incident, life had changed in a gazillion ways, not the least of which was that the FBI arrested my stepfather, and he went to federal prison. Life is full of stories, so my mother found herself living in the trailer alone, as I had moved out before that. On the phone one night, she asked, "What do you think of Bobby?" To which I responded, "I don't know a Bobby." Annoyed, she prompted, "He lived next door for years. Your dad hated him, you remember." I laughed and said, "Oh, you mean creepy neighbor dude? I think he's creepy, obviously." Cue awkward silence and then her saying, "Oh, well, he kissed me today. I think I like him." Cue shocked and dismayed silence followed by me reminding her about the leg comment and the few other times in 5 years that I tried to tell her that he made me feel uncomfortable. Her response, "Oh, you're just always scared of everyone. You probably just had a crush on him and didn't realize it." Spoiler, it didn't work out between them romantically, but he did try to become a squatter in her trailer and had to be forcibly removed. So, creepy neighbor dude, please, let's not meet ever again. When I was 19, I moved out of my hometown to study in college in a city. During my first month there, life was absolutely good. I lived in a dormitory among other male students. Since we were all separated from the girls due to several privacy issues, our class had many activities and studies to deal with during the first month, so it was hard for me to have some time to talk with my parents or relax. I also felt stressed and pressured at first, but I soon realized I will become more responsible with dealing with multitasks from our teachers. The campus also housed some students with strange and weird personalities. I could tell that I had several encounters with odd students. Some encounters are funny, but some were also sketchy. But I also accepted the fact that all of us in the campus had different personalities, that some can hide and some cannot. I made a lot of friends during my first year. One of them was Terry, who became my best friend during most of the college years. Bullying is not an issue in the campus since the system was very good. I also started to actively participate on school clubs and extracurricular activities in the campus, a thing that would make me more socialized. When going back to my hometown and enjoying my time with my family, it only happens fully on summer. However, on spring break or holidays like Christmas break, we usually spend our time on completing complex projects and presentations. On weekends, we are not separate from the jaws of assignments, so we usually spend weekends typing on laptop and researching rather than relaxing and having time with our families. During my second year of college, I met this girl named Laura, who has recently transferred to the university. I met her when Terry and I went to the girls' dormitory, as he talked with his girlfriend Christine. By that time, Laura happened to be Christine's roommate, and they were both friends as well. During our stay there, Laura began asking me various questions like, "Do you have a girlfriend?" She also stated how she would like to date with a boy like me. Actually, for me, that doesn't make sense at first. My main focus was my studies. I also claimed that she was only kidding that time, so I just continued to answer her question as simple as I could without making a sign that I'm interested on her. I didn't experience having a girlfriend for my entire life, and I think of having one if I ever graduated on college. After that, I became a topic of Laura's friends. She apparently told her friends about me, and yes, it became a hot topic, not just on them, but on Laura's acquaintances as well. Meanwhile, Terry and I decided to keep it private. We decided to just tell it on a few trusted friends. However, as time goes by, Laura begins texting me, and I admit at first it was hard to talk with her, since I'm busy on my studies and I don't have any interest on relationships at all. But I lately realized that I shall grab the opportunity, as Terry told me that Laura is really serious on flirting with me. So I made a big decision. I decided to text her back. We started texting each other, and then we began meeting in person. Then I ended up dating her officially. I entered a relationship, she became my girlfriend, and we both admitted that we were in love with each other. We both started dating and she introduced me to her friends. I was able to get along with them as time passed by. I started to know more about her. However, she also started to become overprotective on our relationship, and she also started to become annoying whenever I failed to meet her on time. At first I knew it was nothing, since I knew that girls like her wanted a good relationship. I also decided to talk about my time on my studies, and she was able to understand my time there. Our relationship continued on the course of the college years, without any conflict, only short arguments, but it started to become sour during our final year of college. She changed a lot during the final year. She's very paranoid to the extreme, doubtful and envious. She would also start arguments even inside the campus. It would turn to a scene which is embarrassing for me. So one time I decided to become distant to her and focus more on my studies. However, one night while I was studying, I heard a knock on my door, so I decided to open it up. My roommate was already asleep, so it must be Terry, and I opened it. However, I was wrong. It was Laura standing straight on the doorway. She had that frustrated look on her face while looking towards me. She began asking while I started to distance away from her. I explained everything to her, and that was it. She angrily left my dormitory without any words. I can't even tell if she had listened to my words. One time when I was heading to my room, after the end of our last subject, I saw her inside when I entered. She was vandalizing the room, and to make matters worse, she had been writing something in big letters that said, "You are going to pay for this," on the walls. The sign is written in red, and the letters almost looked to be drawn in blood, and that creeped me out a bit. I immediately took her outside to confront her, but she started to make a scene. It only stopped when the school authorities intervened. Afterwards, I explained everything to them, and it became sufficient evidence for Laura to be suspended for a week. My roommate and I were relocated to another room in the dormitory, since our previous room was cleaned up. However, the cleaners found broken glass under my bed while cleaning. Now I knew that she was off to no good with her intentions. After that, Laura started messaging me on my phone. The messages ranged from deep explanation to profanities. She even started threatening me, which is creepy and far disturbing for me. So I had enough and decided to block her number. But it doesn't end there. This incident really changed my perspective on Laura. But I'm thankful that I saw her true colors that shined very bad. After her suspension ended, I decided to break up with her. She didn't say any words at all, but her face looked frustrated, and she didn't show up for several days. I did apologize to her when I decided to break up with her, but I also feel sorry for her since I felt that she might be depressed. But days passed and I saw her in the campus. She continued to attend class, however, I did not see her being accompanied by her friends. That made me think that our breakup was also a big impact on her friendship with her friends. However, I didn't expect that she would also use social media to pour her anger on me. One time while I was surfing Facebook, I saw a post from Laura that shows my pictures. The post captioned had profanities, so I had enough. I reported the post and blocked her on Facebook. I already had enough of her immaturity and malevolent nature, so I did just the right thing. After our breakup, I gained the courage to talk to Terry and my friends. I decided to reconcile with them. Our relationship as brothers started to deteriorate when I started dating Laura, so I apologized to them. They accepted my apology and welcomed me back to the squad. One time I decided to ask Christine about Laura. She said that she didn't really move on and it made things worse. That's the reason why she requested another roommate to replace Laura. According to Christine, Laura's obsession of me caused her to be imprisoned on my quagmire. So to be simple, she never freed herself from her own misery or woe. She changed a lot after the breakup. She would cry for the longest time and sometimes would swear uncontrollably inside of the room. Laura also started to show her darker side to them. She would get into fights with other students. She would even make threats. She also started to talk about dark and creepy stuff, which scared her friends shitless. Scratch marks also appeared on her arms, which made her friends skeptical that she was going to kill herself anytime. So they confronted her, and it didn't help, since she had also become violent. She started throwing her objects violently, and she would even physically harass Christine and her friends. This caused them to distance away from Laura. That shocked me a lot. I expected that she will realize her wrongdoings and change for the best, but I was wrong. She changed for the worst. Afterwards, I didn't hear much about Laura. She didn't even try to talk to me. In fact, she was always alone. She also didn't apologize to her friends, and it looked like she doesn't have any interest on having friends anymore. Months passed by, and I finally graduated. I was able to erase those bad memories on my mind and move on. After graduation, I decided to go back to my hometown, where I would start my new life. Most of my friends who lived in the city want to enjoy their life and partying, while others want to be on vacation. My other friends who lived outside the city, meanwhile, returned back to their hometowns, where they celebrate their achievements with their family. Christine moved in with Terry. They both lived in one roof in the suburbs near the city. I stayed in contact with my friends, however, I didn't receive any news about Laura. I expect her to change and finally move on. Meanwhile, I found a stable job in my hometown, and I easily got promoted due to my skills. I bought a new house far away from my parents, and I moved there to start my new independent life. I really expected that my life would be peaceful now. Laura's past actions was not a big concern for me now. I already planned on facing the future and not even revisiting the past, and so I did. However, my expectations for a peaceful life was wrong. That doesn't end there. One evening after a long stressful day at work, I was driving back to my home when I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked it up, there was just breathing sound on the other end, so I hung up since I knew it was just a prank caller. However, when I was already in home, the number wouldn't stop calling, only for me to hear the same breathing sound on the other end. I then blocked the number and went to sleep. That morning, I saw something in the mailbox outside my house. The mail contains this word: I don't forgive, and I don't forget, written in red. That reminded me of what Laura wrote on the walls of our room, but I threw it in the garbage since I knew it was just a prank from some kids. One afternoon, since my shift had already ended, when I got home, I saw another mail in the mailbox. But this time it said, "You can't run, you can't hide, and you can't escape," written in red again. I decided to ask my neighbor about the mail on my mailbox, and he said that he had seen a car go by hours ago, pulling over to the side of the road, directly in front of my house, and then he saw a girl went out and inserted the mail into my mailbox. That's when my heart dropped. I knew it was Laura, but how could she have known where I lived? My mind is full of questions until I received a call from a random number. I picked it up and I heard a familiar voice saying, "Go outside, I have a gift for you." That's when I was shocked. It was Laura telling me to go out, but how could she have possibly traced where I lived? That's my biggest question by this time. I made a deep breath and burst out of my house, yelling for her to show up. But I was greeted by an eerie silence outside my house. There were no cars in the streets by that time. But that's when I heard a glass shattering behind me. I looked and saw my front window shattered by something. I was very angry at that point, and I was ready to confront Laura without knowing the dangers behind, as I didn't see anything. I decided to check my window, but as I turned back to go inside my house, a pile of rocks began to rain on me. It was coming from the woods. It was non-stop and I got seriously hurt, so I dashed towards my front door and slammed it shut. I then saw a rock on the floor. It had a sign saying, "You made the wrong choice." I've had enough, and I called the police and explained the whole situation to them. By that time, it was still raining rocks outside. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. By that time, I saw them storming through the woods, since my house was the very last in the block, and the place is very woody. As minutes passed by, the officers knocked on my door. I immediately opened it, and they told me that the rocks were coming from a catapult in the woods. It suddenly turned off when they dashed through the woods, and when they arrived, there was no one operating it. I gave the rock with a sign to it to the officers, so they can turn it in as evidence. After that, they told me to call them if something happens again, and then left. The next few days, nothing happened until one Friday night. While I was watching TV, I heard a hard thud coming from my front door. It sounded like a rock, so I decided to open the door to see for myself, and another rock with a sign on it said, "I can see you." That creeped me out, and when I looked on the street, there was a white SUV, parked directly on the other side of the street parallel to my house. I decided to confront whoever was there, but when I looked inside the SUV, it was blurred, so I couldn't make out if there was someone in there, or if it was Laura or just another person. I decided to go back inside and close the door. As I felt sleepy, I decided to turn off everything. I went upstairs to my bedroom and I fell asleep shortly. I woke up by 2:15 a.m. in the morning. Strangely, the power was gone, so my aircon is turned off, and it was hot. So I went to find out if there was a blackout, but there isn't any as my neighbor's light downstairs were on. Now, there must be someone who turned off the power switch. That is my basement. When I went out, it was very dark at all corners by that time, so I fetched my flashlight in my room and used it. As I went downstairs, I saw that both front door and back door were closed, so I went to the basement. My basement had a door outside, however, and it has no lock, so someone could have broken in and turned the power off. It must be an intruder, my first thought, but I also knew that it was Laura, since I already knew that she was behind all those mails and phone calls, and even the catapult with the rocks. As I went down to the basement, I switched the power on, and all the electricity in the house went back on. But the light also in the basement opened for me, and I see someone hiding behind the boxes. When I saw who that guy was, my heart dropped. It was Laura. She was wearing a white dress, and her face is unrecognizable, since it had bruises all over. Her skin was pale white, and she was like the girl on The Ring. She's not that Laura that I met in college, but she was something worse. My heart started racing, and she smiled and asked in a persuading voice, "I wanted to be with you again. Can we?" I then aggressively yelled, "No, get the fuck out of here, or I'm gonna call the cops." She stood and started walking towards me, while also looking into my soul, and then pulled something out of her back. It was a gun, and she tossed one box on the floor, only for me to see her deranged obsession on me. It was all pictures of me in college scattered on the ground. She said that she intentionally brought all these along with her in my basement. She also admitted to breaking into my room several times while I was in college. She then took one picture, and it was a picture of me sleeping on my room in the dormitory. She showed it to me and said in a kidding voice, "You're such a handsome guy, but you wasted such a beautiful diamond like me, so I'm going to make sure that your life is going to be wasted too." She then teared my picture into pieces and aims the gun at me. I easily evaded it as she fired one shot that could have surely woke up my neighborhood. I then dashed upstairs and tried to lock the basement door, only to fail as she fired another shot at the door. It almost hit me, so I left it wide open as I quickly dashed upstairs. Back to my bedroom, I locked the door and hid in the closet. At first, I heard her footsteps going room to room, until it stopped by my door. She tried to open the door, but it was locked, so she began pounding and yelling in a frantic voice for me to open the door. Then there was a brief silence until she used enough force to break the door down. She began searching the whole room with her gun still drawn. Luckily, she passed my closet. She looked at my bed, and since the closet was behind her, I picked up my baseball bat and took a deep breath. I then slightly went out of the closet. She was staring at the bed, and I hit her in the back as hard as I could. And I eventually did, and she was knocked unconscious. I picked up her gun and called the police. I tied her to the chair so she couldn't escape. The police arrived shortly and they arrested Laura. She began to lose her mind while in handcuffs. She began swearing at me, and then she tried to attack me, only to be tackled by the police officers. After that, I pressed charges against her. However, she declared mentally insane due to her behavior in the courtroom. This led her to be sent to a mental asylum instead. It was not a major concern for me anymore since the asylum had strong security, so it would be hard for her to escape if she had tried. She apparently had a mental disorder that encompassed extreme obsession, which is dangerous when left uncontrolled, as she went into a psychiatric therapy during the course of her trial to determine if she was mentally insane or not. My family and friends knew the incident. I recount one time when I met with Terry and Christine in a bar. They told me that Laura had been missing for 12 days after the graduation. Her older brother began contacting her friends, including them. One student did get contacted by her brother and said that she had been last seen in a bar, drinking, and this concerned her brother very much, so he coordinated with the police to find his sister, only to fail. However, one fateful morning, she returned home crying. She apparently walked kilometers to reach her home, and she slept on the streets for days. The reason, her wallet was stolen in the bar, and she was drunk by that time. She arrived home penniless. Months passed and her brother began witnessing strange behavior, so he urged her to consult a psychiatrist, but she refused, and her brother still forced her to do so. She then left suddenly one early morning without any mail. Her brother was a member of the National Guard, so he owned a gun, but she had stole it early that morning. Also, she had left. After that, her brother began doing things to find her, but all of them failed. He gave up after that, and the last time he would ever see her was in the courtroom. I lately knew that I gave some piece of information on Laura while we were still dating. The name of my hometown and my phone number were also just some of my personal informations that I'd given to her. These were just informations that she probably remembered and had written down to trace me. Afterwards, I moved out of that house and decided to live near my parents' house to be more close to them. I haven't heard from Laura ever since until now. Besides, I don't want anything to do with her ever again. It's very far disturbing on what a person can do just because of obsession. Hey guys, I want to thank you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please consider clicking that subscribe button and bell icon to be notified of all future videos. I try to post around 5 times a week, and if you have a story of your own you'd like to be featured on the channel, head over to my subreddit r/GensenOfficial, and if you want early access to my videos as well as having your name featured in the video, head over to Patreon, where only $1 a month gets you that, and some other fun perks. I've also got some merch now over on Spreadshirt. I as well offer all my videos on my podcast that can be found on all major podcast services. All links will be located in the description field. Hope everyone has a good night, and remember, keep it spooky.